There is a moment in the history of every culture when a story stops being a story and becomes something else. A mirror, a standard, a definition of what it means to be human at one's best. Japan has many such stories. But there is one that has been told for 300 years without losing its power, that is taught in schools and staged in theaters and visited in shrines, that moves people to silence and to tears, not because it ends happily, but because it does not end happily at all, and because the men at the center of it knew this from the beginning and chose their path anyway. The story of the 47 Ronin begins in 1701 in the city of Edo, which we now call Tokyo, in the ceremonial world of the Tokugawa shogunate, a Japan of rigid hierarchy, elaborate protocol, and the absolute rule of a military government that had kept the country at peace for nearly a century. Into this world came Lord Asano Naganori, a young provincial lord summoned to the capital to perform ceremonial duties at the shogun's court. He was required, as all provincial lords were, to learn the elaborate etiquette of the court from a senior official appointed for the purpose. That official was Kira Yoshinaka. The exact nature of what passed between Asano and Kira has never been fully established. What is known is that Asano drew his short sword inside Edo Castle, an act that was categorically forbidden, one of the most serious violations of the shogunate's law, and attacked Kira, wounding him on the forehead and the back before being restrained. Whether the attack was the result of unprovoked fury or a response to sustained provocation and deliberate humiliation, Kira was widely known as a corrupt and contemptuous man who expected bribes that Asano apparently refused to pay, is a question that history has never definitively answered. It did not matter. The act was the act. The law was the law. Lord Asano was ordered to commit seppuku, ritual suicide, that same day. He died with the particular dignity that the samurai code demanded of a man facing such an ending, kneeling on a white mat in a garden, disemboweling himself with his short sword, his second ending his suffering with a swift blow. He was 35 years old. He had done nothing to Kira that the official could not walk away from, but he had drawn his sword in Edo Castle, and for that there was only one outcome. His domain was confiscated, his family was ruined, and his 300 samurai, the armed retainers who had served him and whose entire identity and livelihood was bound to his house, became Ronin, masterless men, men without a lord. In the world of feudal Japan, this was not merely unemployment, it was a kind of social death. A samurai without a master was a sword without a purpose, a man outside the order that gave life meaning. Of those 300, most dispersed. They found other employment, returned to their families, or accepted the dissolution of what they had been. But 47 of them, led by the house chamberlain, a man named Oishi Kuranosuke, made a different decision. They made it quietly, without announcement, without ceremony. They simply did not let go. They swore an oath in secret to avenge their lord. And then they waited. The waiting was its own ordeal, arguably the harder part of the story, the part that most fully demonstrates what these men were made of. Anyone can act in a moment of rage or grief. To sustain a purpose across 2 years of careful, deliberate, self-obliterating patience requires something else entirely. Kira knew that Asano's men might seek revenge. The shogunate knew it too. The 47 were watched, monitored, their movements tracked by Kira's spies and by the shogunate's own intelligence apparatus. To act too soon would be to fail, to be intercepted before the mission was complete, to achieve nothing, to die without having accomplished what their lord's death demanded. The only path to success was to make every person watching them believe that the oath had been abandoned, Oishi Kuranosuke led the deception with a thoroughness that must have cost him everything he was. He left his wife and his younger children, sending them away, divorcing his wife to protect her from the consequences of what he was planning, and moved to Kyoto, where he spent the following months in a state of deliberate degradation. He frequented the lowest drinking establishments. He was found, on multiple occasions, passed out in the street, rolled into gutters by passers-by who had recognized him and felt nothing but contempt for what the once proud samurai had become. He took a mistress, loudly, publicly, in a way that announced that a man of honor had abandoned the idea of honor entirely. Kira's spies reported back. Oishi Kuranosuke was a broken man, a drunk, a disgrace. He was no longer a threat. The other 46 Ronin enacted variations of the same performance. Some became merchants or craftsmen. Some hired themselves out as laborers. One, Horiba Yahai, an old man, went further than any of them. He watched his own son be adopted into another family and disavow him publicly, the son believing or pretending to believe that his father was what he appeared to be. The performances were sustained for nearly 2 years. The men who maintained them understood that every day of degradation was a day purchased against the moment that was coming. One of the 47 broke. A samurai named Terasaka Kichiemon, for reasons that were never fully recorded, left the group at some point before the final operation. He lived for decades afterward, dying in old age, the only one of the 47 to survive the story. History has never reached a consensus on what to make of him. A deserter, a coward, a man who simply could not carry the weight of what the others carried, or something else entirely. He is the shadow at the edge of the story. The others held. In the winter of 1702, they began to move into position. Small groups, approaching Edo from different directions, arriving quietly, finding lodgings, reconnecting with one another in secret. Oishi had obtained the floor plan of Kira's compound. He had assigned roles. He had established signals and timing. The operation had been planned with the precision of professional soldiers who had spent 2 years thinking about nothing else. They chose a night in December, the 14th day of the 12th month of 1702, which fell in January of 1703 on the Western calendar. It was winter. The night was cold. Snow had fallen. It was, in retrospect, exactly the kind of night this story should have happened on. Just before midnight, the 47 assembled outside Kira's compound in the snow. They were divided into 2 groups, one for the front gate, one for the rear. Oishi gave a signal. They went in. The battle, if it can be called a battle, lasted a matter of hours. Kira's guards were numerous, but the Ronin were trained, prepared, and had the crucial advantage of complete surprise. The compound was secured. Kira's men fought and were overcome, and then the 47 searched the compound for the man at the center of everything, the man whose insult, whether real or imagined, had set this entire chain of events in motion 2 years before. They found Kira Yoshinaka hiding in a small outbuilding, dressed in white robes, armed with a short sword, trembling in the cold. Oishi offered him the same dignity that had been offered to Lord Asano, the chance to die by his own hand. Kira did not take it. He cowered. He said nothing. He was not, it turned out, the kind of man his position had led him to believe himself to be. Oishi cut off his head with the same short sword that Lord Asano had used on the day of his death, preserved by the 47 for exactly this purpose, and carried it across the city to the temple of Sengakuji, where Lord Asano was buried. They placed the head on the grave. They cleaned it with water from the temple well. They burned incense. They reported to their lord, in the only way available to them, that the debt had been paid. Then they sat down and waited for the authorities. This is the detail that separates the story of the 47 Ronin from every other revenge narrative in the history of literature and history itself. They did not run. They had always known they would not run. From the moment they swore their oath, they had known that the completion of their mission would be followed by their own deaths, that the shogunate could not permit 47 men to murder a senior official and go unpunished, regardless of the justice of their cause. They had accepted this. They had built it into the plan. The deaths at the end were not a consequence they had failed to anticipate. They were part of what they had chosen. The shogunate deliberated for weeks about what to do with them. The legal and moral questions were genuinely complicated. Kira had been widely considered corrupt and unworthy, and public opinion was almost entirely on the side of the Ronin. But the law was the law, and the law could not permit unauthorized killing, even of the deserving. The decision, when it finally came, was a compromise that acknowledged both the crime and the extraordinary character of those who had committed it. The 47 Ronin would be permitted to die by seppuku, rather than being executed as common criminals. It was, in the calculus of the samurai world, an honor, and they received it as one. On the 4th day of the 2nd month of 1703, 46 of the 47 Ronin committed seppuku. They did it with the same deliberate calm with which they had done everything else in this story. The 47th, Terasaka Kichiyamon, the one who had left before the raid, was pardoned, for reasons that remain unclear, and lived to old age. The 46 were buried together at Sengakuji Temple, beside the grave of Lord Asano, whose head they had avenged. Their graves are still there. The temple is still visited by hundreds of thousands of people every year. The well where they washed Kira's head is still there. The incense still burns at their graves. People still come and stand in the quiet of the temple grounds and feel something. Not quite grief, not quite admiration. Something that sits between the two and has no precise English name. The Japanese word for it might be aware. The bittersweet recognition of beauty and transience, of the weight of things that pass and leave something permanent behind. The 47 Ronin are gone. What they did remains. The choice they made, not to run, not to forget, not to accept the dissolution of what they owed their lord, and then not to run after they had paid it, is as present in that temple courtyard as the incense, smoke, and the cold air, and the stones above their names. They knew they would die for it. They chose it anyway. And the world, 300 years later, still goes to their graves and stands in silence and understands, without needing to be told, exactly why.